If we can't talk to each other, we're not gonna make it.
Sometimes I feel like I've bitten off more than I can chew.
Most of the time, I work in a glass jar and lead a very uneventful life.
A face full of glass hurts like hell when you're in it.
That's weird. That glass looks half full to me.
Eating glass.
Eating glass and staring into the abyss.
Glass? Who gives a shit about glass? Who the fuck is this?
It's kind of part of our culture to eat glass.
Gotta get some safety goggles next time.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Chewing Glass, the show where we talk to developers building on the Solana ecosystem. Today I'm joined by Jon Cinque, an engineer for the core Solana protocol. He's worked everything from the token swap to stake pools, and more recently, the poorly named Token 22 program, which I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with. Hey Jon, how's it going, man?
Yeah, pretty good. How about you, Chase?
Not too shabby. Man, you and I go sort of way back. I think I probably started, I started like mid 2021. I think recently just found out that you started like not too long before that. I think maybe shortly after the launch of mainnet or something like that. Is that right?
Yeah, so I joined in August of 2020. That was the official start date. It was around the time when Solana mainnet was launched, starting to pick up some steam.
Nice. Well, cool, man. The way we usually like to start this show out, like obviously you've been around here for now coming up on 3 years, chewed a ton of glass, but want to find out a little bit about Jon and like historically, like were you a CS major or were you an engineer by trade in the early days of your career? Like how did it all get started for you?
I actually studied physics in college, took a few computer science courses, and the whole time thinking like, oh, this computer science thing is pretty cool. And then coming out of college, you see everyone getting, six-figure job offers, and you're like, that's pretty cool, isn't it, right out of college? So I found a way to parlay the physics into more CS work.
Yeah, there's a couple in the ecosystem. I know Mert is a big physics guy, TJ Littlejohn, who helped with Solana Pay. There's lots of big physics guys like in the ecosystem. So you were physics, you saw all your friends making a lot more money than you out of college, and you were like, well, shit, I should probably go see if I can do that thing. So like, where'd you go from there?
Actually, yeah, it was pretty funny. It was specifically, and I know this is maybe going to make me sound a little tooly, but it was seeing The Social Network, the movie. I was like, oh man, yeah, that is really cool. You just make things with code and then it becomes this like big, huge thing. I was like, I kind of want to do that too. So I got my first job was at Bloomberg in New York. They have a special program where they take people that studied like math or physics or electrical engineering, and they take you through 4 months of training, and then they put you in a team as a junior engineer. So it's really like the perfect job for me.
Wow, I didn't realize that was a thing. So basically they just because I went to school, I paid a lot of money for my computer science degree, and then like pretty much right as soon as I graduated, these like boot camps and like all these sort of like learn to code things where people paid substantially less money and got the same jobs as me started to spin up. But I didn't realize groups like Bloomberg sort of take like relatively like mathematical or scientific people and then taught them how to code. That's actually pretty interesting. How was that? Like, did they start you out on like JavaScript, or like is it pretty like intensive?
It's pretty intensive. I mean, it's like getting paid to go to a 1 semester of college, and the way that they thought about it, and I thought it was brilliant, because like you go back to the early 2010s. That's when Facebook is becoming huge. Like LinkedIn had a record IPO in 2011. This is a time when computer science, people majoring in computer science coming out of college were at like the highest premium possible. And Bloomberg knew that they were competing with the likes of Google and Facebook and Amazon and all of those. And they were like, we're not as big a name as they are. Like, we're big, but we're not going to be as well known to them. Instead of paying ridiculous amounts of money for CS majors, why don't we pay a little bit less money for math and physics majors and then just teach them to code in 4 months?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
They typically know, you have to know how to code a little bit at least. It's not just like total newbies.
I actually really like that, and not just for the like, oh, this will like we'll pay people less because like they don't know how to code. It almost like adds a little bit of loyalty, like they're giving you something that you would have had to pay for outside of that. So there's like, that's actually incredibly smart thing to do, which is somewhat what I'm actually doing right now by helping build education globally and making sure that that's free to everybody. So like that sort of like rings true, and like that's actually a pretty really cool piece of information. I had no idea that that's how Bloomberg, like in the early days, trying to get some really good engineers, didn't have to compete with that, and they probably got some quality engineers out of that strategy just by like focusing on like specific groups of people such as yourself from like physics, because obviously I think I don't know, you could probably argue this, but I feel like physics is much harder than most software engineering. But you tell me this, you've been working on Solana core protocol stuff. Was your toughest physics class harder than the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah, of course. You know, you think about I mean, there are different types of, I shouldn't say it's like completely as easy, because like sometimes you need to look at like an entire architecture of a system, and especially for things like the gossip protocol in Solana, where it's like every single byte makes a difference. You know, you're
right.
Really the most constrained resource that you have on the validator is going to be bandwidth. So you have to like really figure out the optimization problem there, but it's still not, you know, it's not quantum mechanics. Right.
So like, but one is sort of based in math and the other one's a little more based on logic. Is that fair, or is that sort of off the mark yet again?
No, that's actually probably the best way of putting it.
All right, so Bloomberg taught you how to code. What happened after that? Did you stick around there for a while, or did you have like, let's like leading up into before like you even like cared or gave like knew much about crypto? Like, what was the sort of career arc for you after Bloomberg?
So after Bloomberg, so I was at Bloomberg for 5 years total between New York and London.
And what languages were you coding in? Sorry, I wanted to get that one.
Oh yeah, sure. It was C++ for the most part, and then some JavaScript for the front end.
Cool.
And then actually some Python too. They sort of brought everything in, but it was C++ 03, which was not very fun. They kept talking about being like, oh, we're going to do C++ 11 soon. And it was always like, this isn't going to happen. I wonder now, should ask some of my friends that are back there to see if they ever finally went 64-bit and things like that. But yeah, so after that, it's a bit of a non-traditional path. Around the time that I was in London at Bloomberg, this was end of 2015. Yes, end of 2015. I started teaching yoga while I was also working at Bloomberg. And so that was going really well. I was like picking up more and more classes to the point where I was like really burning out badly, because like having a full-time job and then picking up another job that was becoming full-time wasn't very fun. So eventually I was like, I think I can do this and just be a yoga teacher full-time and maybe pick up like 20 hours of programming a week. So that was sort of the plan. And eventually I quit Bloomberg, did the yoga teaching full-time, picked up a little job for a website, didn't really work out. And then eventually funds started to run a little low, and then start of 2016, I was starting to look for some other jobs. And randomly, a guy I knew from way back when, my brother's best friend, gets in touch with me. He's like, hey, you looking to do any programming work? I said, sure. He said, it's PHP. I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. He's like, yeah, it's for this crypto guy. I'm like, okay, whatever. And that's sort of what got me into it. He was building essentially a Bloomberg terminal for crypto. So bringing together all sorts of exchange information. He was doing arbitrage in 2016, which was a very profitable strategy for certain very well-known figures in the crypto space.
Wow. Okay. So before you had that conversation, like being in somewhat nerdy circles, were you already aware of Bitcoin? Like in the prior years, did you buy Bitcoin, or were you like, what the hell is this thing?
I didn't. We talked about it back when I was at Bloomberg quite a bit. I remember in 2013, having a conversation, being like, oh man, maybe we should buy into this. I'm just like, okay, whatever. And I didn't. Probably should have. That was around the time where people started talking about it.
So that was 2016, and you joined a team to start building PHP stuff to do to do ARBs, and you did that for a while, or what?
So yeah, I did that for all of 26. Sorry, all of 20. Oh no, we're in 2017 now. So it was end of 2017 that I've been working with them for a while. They wanted to actually bootstrap a company out of it, and so they brought me on board as CTO for this company, which was making the terminal, which was fetching data, which was allowing you to write scripts in essentially C#, which would then execute on our server. So sort of like a platform provider, automatic trading, things like a project that, as it turned out, a lot of other people.
Was this using like an early stage Oracle for this? Like how was that working? Like, what was reading the prices for there, like to create this terminal? Sorry, and you said an early stage what? Oracle. Oh, no. This was all just exchanges. None of this was on chain. The joke, I had a friend who was like really into Ethereum, and I would talk to him about what I'm doing, and he said, oh, yeah, centralized exchanges. He's like, that's kind of the least interesting part of crypto, and he was right. Nice. So like to jump back into it, like you were there, you became CTO. Like, did you leading up into Solana was that the lead into it, or was there anything else like after that? No, that was pretty much it. I worked with them for, I guess, 2018, 2019. They pulled the plug in early 2020. And so at that point, I was just doing more odd jobs. I decided to pick up Rust in that time. It was March of 2020. And I was like, oh, I think this Rust thing's going to be a big deal. Why not? I've got a little more free time. How did you come to that conclusion about Rust at a time like in 2020? How did you come to that conclusion? It's fun. I can't exactly remember what my thought process was. I think it was because I did the Recurse Center in fall of 2017, which was eventually how I got connected to Solana. And while I was there, a lot of people were talking about Rust and being like, oh yeah, this is like the next big thing. This is going to be huge. And I saw that it kept like gaining more and more steam. It hit 1.0, and I'm like, all right, let's finally see what all this is about. I had done some OCaml before, and I was like, okay, this is kind of like a mix of OCaml and C++ and sort of like the best parts of modern C++. I'm like, all right, let's give this a shot. I got nothing else going on. Let's see what happens. So you must have been hanging around in some really nerdy circles. Was this from your yoga classes that you were meeting these people that were into Rust, or was this just like random internet forums? No, this was, started, like I said, in 2017. This was at the Recurse Center, which is a self-directed sort of sabbatical program for developers where you typically do a stint of either, I can't remember, I think it's 6 or 12 weeks, or maybe it's 8 or 16 weeks. I can't remember the exact number. And so you go there and it's completely free form. You just do whatever you want for that time. I decided to get into some open source contribution, learn a tiny little bit about ML, but really more about doing some open source work, which eventually I used for the work in the crypto trading company. Cool. All right. Now, this is my favorite question, like to always ask. Like, I've never done it because you're the first core protocol engineer we've actually, core contributor really, that we've ever had on here, at least a substantial core contributor. Like, you joined Solana Labs in late 2020. Who found you, and how did they convince you to go build on this thing that nobody had any clue would ever work? Or even further than that, lots of people were claiming that it had no chance in hell to ever work. Like who found you, and how did they convince you to do it? Yeah, it's this was back in the day, so they so it was through the Recurse Center. I had been interviewing for jobs. I was looking for some Rust jobs because I was like, I spent all this time learning this thing, may as well try and use it. And it sort of was like the perfect combination of things. They were looking for someone that had sort of built crypto trading applications. Essentially what we had done at the previous place was create a runtime for people to create their own automated trading bots. And so then that was a really nice sort of, and we'd also worked on creating an exchange, and we were eventually going to just hook it up to a smart contract on Ethereum. So there was like a lot of correspondences that they were looking for in someone who worked in Rust as well. So the Recurse Center was like, hey, do you want to talk to this company? I think
Anatoly's wife did it, but I can't remember when exactly. So it was through Anatoly's wife that the Recurse Center found me and put me in touch with Anatoly and Greg in July of 2020.
That's
That
a
was my
brand
first
new one for me.
conversation.
Intro to Solana via Anatoly's wife. Like that's first I've heard that. That might be the first. Yes, that is the first. So that's a pretty interesting story. So you met them. You met with Toly and Greg Fitzgerald, one of the early co-founders. If for some of you listening who don't realize that there were multiple in the early days, and Greg was one of the huge contributors. I think he actually did a large amount of the documentation from what I recall, in the early stage documentation that wasn't perfectly readable to learn how to build on Solana. But
Very clear though.
That's a story for another time. So what happened after that? You met them. Did you actually have? I know in those days there wasn't any sort of real like. I think when I started, the coding challenges was like, here's a PR, go do this, come back when you're done, and if you do a really good job, we'll hire you.
Yeah, that was actually at that point too. So they gave me, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it had to do with the bank's client, which is only really used for testing at this point. And they were using TarPC, which is an RPC framework written by Google in Rust. And it's a bit of a finicky framework. It does their macros sort of do a lot for you without you knowing. So there was a problem that they couldn't reuse a client twice for like 2 requests at once. So they wanted to figure out like how they could write it to do that. And as it turns out, the way that TarPC was done back then, you sort of had to use a workaround in order to do it. So I was like fiddling around with like async lifetimes. This was like async Rust at that point was really, really tricky. If you think it's tough now, like back in 2020, it was way harder. So figuring out how to make everything work in order to reuse this client. And so eventually I posted an issue with a workaround to the Google GitHub. And I guess that was enough to convince Greg.
That's awesome, man. Like, this is just like another one of those stories where like just Web3 is a much different process for hiring than pretty much any other industry. It's just like, do you have what it takes to solve some really hard problems? And if the answer is yes, you'll probably get hired. So that's a super cool story. And I'm trying to think what else would be. Yeah. So after you got hired, and then like I sort of alluded to this in the intro of the show. But you started with token swaps. Was that like day one? They were like, "Hey, Jon, did the token swap program exist, or did you create it and then or did you take it over?"
So it existed in a really broken way. Like I think it was something that Anatoly had thrown together in like a couple of hours. And they're essentially like, hey, we need to have Uniswap on Solana. Go ahead and do it. And like build tools didn't super exist. It was just like this build.sh script that we used. There was no documentation really about how to write programs. So I had to like learn how to write Solana programs. I had to constantly bug. It was like Jack and Tierra for the most part. I had to bug them constantly because there was no documentation about how to do things. And they would like point me to the right places.
Well, I think for you gave back substantially. Like you might have had to bug those guys, but when I first joined, I tried to bug everybody, and you were like one of the very few like engineers at the time that would give me the time when I was asking a million questions. I like had no idea. I was like, Jon, like there's no documentation for how to do XYZ. It was like, yeah, we just tell people to go look at the tests. And I'm like, that's not going to work. So we have to figure out a better way. But anyways, to your credit, you spent countless, I don't even know how many days this would add up to in the early stage. You and the rest of the core engineering team, like answering questions, just one off the same question every day, over and over and over again. And like, that's actually how I learned like what the actual issues were, because it's like, how do I transfer SOL? Like, that's like how little information was out there on the internet. Or how do I create a token? How do I send an SPL token? That didn't exist unless you were somebody who just going to dig into the code and look at the tests and figure it out. So like, it was a very interesting time, but you were definitely there to help me out. So that token swap program, did you pretty much, that thing is not really under, it's not still being worked on, right? This was just like an early days program. Like once it was good, it was good.
Yeah, pretty much. We haven't really touched it in a long time. It's funny, every once in a while, there's someone from the Jupiter team who will reach out to me and be like, oh, by the way, X project is still using it. X project is still using it. Like, he'll just tell me about all these different projects that are somehow still using it. I'm like, great. Hey, as long as the worst feeling is as a developer is when you like work on something, you write a bunch of code and it never gets run. That's the worst feeling. So even if it's like old code that may not be perfect, I'm happy that it's still being used.
Yeah, I think like I partially agree, but like let's say you build something, reference implementation that never actually gets used by itself, but somebody forks it, keeps it open source, and then like morphs it into this massive beast of a program. Sure, it's like nice that somebody used yours, but like obviously your swap program was a reference implementation for pretty much every DeFi protocol out there today. You know, like I doubt anybody didn't look at that to build out their own swapping mechanism. And if you did, like, what are you even doing? Like, at least take a look at it. So I think the ripple impact of something like the stake or the swapping program is far greater than it might feel like, even though you do hear about people still using it today, which is interesting. So in parallel or after that, stake pools, maybe you could explain just, I know most people understand what stake pools are, but like you were working on that program. Did you build that one from scratch first off?
No, so this one actually, it was funny. We had a developer from Everstake that was kind of on loan who would like send me these like 1,000-line PRs and we would go back and forth on them for a long time in order to get them merged in. And so this developer, essentially he got like the base of it, working. And so once the base of it was working, I remember having a conversation with Anatoly and Michael where I was like, this is what you, like we'd spoken about it before and sort of talked about the design for it. And they were looking at it and like, oh man, this isn't really going to be very usable, is it? I'm like, this is what we talked about. I said that it wouldn't be usable. And they're like, we probably need to get this to be usable. So then I spent all of 2021 getting it to be usable pretty much.
And so just for the listeners who who hear the word stake pools all the time but don't know what they are, could you like describe like what that is and like what's its function?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Now they're often referred to as liquid staking protocols. Liquid staking is, I would say, a bit more specific version of a stake pool. But the idea is that people pool together their SOL into a protocol, into one so-called pool that's managed by one entity. And that entity would be the one that actually distributes their SOL to be delegated to validators. So
right.
1,000 people can come in, deposit some SOL into the pool. They get back a token, which represents their percentage of owner or their share of ownership in the pool. Then the manager goes off and stakes the SOL to whichever validators they want. And then over time, the SOL in the pool accrues, the number of tokens stays unchanged. So this way, whenever they want to go get their SOL back, their share of the pool stays the same. They get back more SOL. It's the way to get your rewards through a token.
Yeah, so I mean that was a good explanation, but essentially this is a mechanism to help with decentralization, effectively.
It can be. It also cannot be.
Right.
It can
right.
be.
So,
it can be all sorts of things. Yeah.
It depends on who and what they're trying to accomplish, but like it can be an effective way to decentralize the network without having to manually, individually stake to every validator by yourself.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So next, my favorite topic is going to be, as I mentioned again, the poorly named Token 22 program. So first of all, before we get into all of that work that I think you mentioned you worked a couple years on, how was that name decided?
You know, it's funny. I can't remember I think it was end of 2021 after the first breakpoint. And I remember having a conversation with, first, Michael and Anatoly were separately reached out to me being like, hey, we've got this idea for this new token program. Do you mind working on it? I didn't really, I had other ideas of what I wanted to work on, but I was like, okay, this sounds like it's important. I'll go ahead and work on it. And we didn't really decide on a name. We were just like, all right, well, we know it's going to be something that we work on in 2022, so let's just call it Token 2022, and we'll eventually come up with a better name. 2022 came and went. No one came up with a better name. And now here we are, end of 2023. The thing is still not like officially recommended on mainnet, and we'll only really have everything in place for the marquee feature confidential transfers in 2024.
Yeah, so it's the Token 22 program has had a lot of buzz on Twitter about that name. Actually, I just have to tell this story because somebody was saying the core engineers should have the option to name at least one program once per year, and Jacob Creech tweeted, "That's how you get Token 22," which was hilarious.
That's very funny.
But anyways, so tell us a little bit about like maybe just like how that was. You spent 2 years sort of developing this, and like how that was, and sort of like what's the impact of Token 2022?
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't like 2 years straight. It was a lot of off and on stuff as other stuff came up. You know, I also, when projects sort of get a little like slowed down or are in like a pretty good place, sometimes I'll like go and look at the core team and see like what's needed on the core validator side. You know, one of the things that we're thinking about is eventually increasing the transaction size in order to accommodate the confidential transfers in Token 2022. So there's like, wasn't 2 years straight.
Right.
But I guess to give you the big picture of it, the concept is we wanted to give more functionality at the token protocol level. People have done very clever things in order to make tokens more functional, able to do more things. Like, for example, the Metaplex metadata program does a whole lot of extra stuff on top of it. Very cool. Super complicated for them. Like, in order to do all of that work to like freeze tokens and then do all the things that they need to, we wanted to add functionality directly back at the protocol level. But whatever we add, it can't necessarily impact those who don't want the new features. So the idea is you opt in to new features on your mints through extensions. So that's sort of like the big thing is you can add extensions for closing your mint, for confidential transfers, for making your tokens non-transferable, for putting in a transfer fee, for making it look like it's garnering interest, like all sorts of stuff.
So basically, token program is the new token program is allowing sort of like an a la carte list of different like functionalities, like on top of like just the traditional being able to mint and send tokens and do a couple extra things. And how complex was that work? Was it just a matter of time, or was it a matter of complexity? Like what was the sort of TLDR on like why it, like obviously you were on and off different things. Was it like challenging to build that specific program, or was it just like a matter of like this is gonna take some time, we need to get it right, or was there more to it than that?
It wasn't. I mean, the most complicated part is the confidential transfers. Like that is like really complicated stuff. Although I will say, like, if you have a moment, read Sam's white paper, which describes the whole protocol. Like, I'm not a cryptographer, but reading through it, I'm like, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. It's not that complicated, but it requires a lot of new runtime functionality in order to do it. Things like curve operations, which is mostly curve operations, and then another native program in order to check that proofs are valid, that people upload for their transfers for, whatever ZK stuff they want to do with their tokens. But then the rest of it, not that complicated. It's more of a, like once you have the extension system in place, I was actually looking at that PR the other day. It was a bit of a monster getting the extension system in place, but then once that's there, the rest of it like really just flows through easily.
Yeah. So I mean, like, I think from everybody else say like, thank you. I think a lot of people were like, one of the big reasons I've seen, there's a lot of reasons people were excited about the new token program, but one of them is that how much this will impact the ability for people to start doing a little more with ZK, zero knowledge on Solana, which is a huge unlock, obviously, for people to be able to do that. So, like, it's super exciting. Are we as token program, the new Token 22 program is officially live in like running on all the validators now, fully audited, or just
Not yet. It's undergoing its final 2 audits currently.
okay?
And it's going to require 1.17 on mainnet plus some features to be enabled before we'll give like the full like, okay, this is good to go. We don't want to like recommend it without confidential transfers. Like that is to me that is the marquee feature that we want to showcase. So until that's available, we won't go ahead with like the full like, yes, official mainnet recommendation thing.
Right.
It is available on all networks for testing purposes.
Testing purposes only, folks. Well, yeah, man, that's exciting. I know this has sort of just been like, you'd hear it would like buzz up, be like, what happened to token 22? And then like it would like not be talked about, and then somebody else would randomly say it again, and it was like this wave, and like now like we're like sort of right around the corner, which is super exciting. All right, so let's token 22. Let's say, all right, shipped. I got some capacity. What's Jon gonna do next?
So the next thing that I'm really excited about, and it's funny, we could almost call it token 2024 or maybe 25. We'll see. And maybe
Please do not do that. And make sure you're allowed to say this like on the internet and like right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the idea is that there's a new runtime being constructed by the runtime team. We're going to need programs for that runtime. We're going to need an SDK for that runtime for people to build their programs and link against others and things like that. That to me is probably going to be the next thing that I'm going to be really excited about. And as part of that, we're going to need a new token program that works on Runtime V2, right?
And we're going to also need new educational content for all of this stuff.
Uh-huh.
Oh, so my job starts over. Great.
Yeah. And so, I was thinking if we're going to make a new token program for Runtime V2, we're going to have to give it a name.
Token 2069, just for safety measures.
Yeah, we could do. I was thinking 2025, right? Because then you're totally sure.
Please, Jon, stop. Because you're not. Like the deadline will be missed specifically because you said that out loud.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I could say token 24 because I shouldn't say probably, but it would be nice if we got something out next year.
Well, that's cool. That's exciting. Runtime V2, ladies and gentlemen. This has been talked about for a while. Like lots of stuff is changing. Obviously, I did want to ask you, like Runtime V2, Fire Dancer, like all these sort of incredible things are happening all at the same time. Like maybe this isn't your world, but there's always a lot of questions out there. Be like, well, once Fire Dancer's live, won't everybody just use that? But I think the part of the thing that's missed, and maybe you're involved in some of these discussions, but like the idea was essentially Fire Dancer can be built without having to test and prod, but the core engineers will take a lot of the lessons learned from Fire Dancer to also enhance the Solana Labs like validator, right? So it's like you're watching somebody else build something more efficient than you, and then you take those lessons and translate those into Rust and then like optimize like in parallel.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of the big idea is like the Fire Dancer team has the luxury of being able to build things with some time from the ground up and know what the bottlenecks are in the current validator. Like the current validator was put together in order to work as quickly as possible. And they've identified a lot of the bottlenecks, and like we can start to integrate some of their findings, be it, I don't know. Actually, I shouldn't say because I don't know specifically what the team is planning on doing, but like any sort of techniques like using different instruction sets for signature verification, or perhaps using different syscalls in order to more efficiently handle network packets, things like that.
And I'm assuming that those that are like heavily focused on that or that have been following very closely along with the Fire Dancer team and all of their optimizations. Yeah,
they're pretty close on that. I haven't seen anything specifically done though.
New token program, new runtime, new validator. it's a little bit anxiety inducing, just because new stuff means like a little bit more unknown things in the future, but like also at the same time, like crazy exciting. The way we like to, I wouldn't say we're not ready to end the show yet, but I do have a couple questions for you. And like, it's a little different coming from a core engineer, because like one of the questions I ask, like what sucks about building on Solana? Like it's just straight up, like, and answer this in any capacity that you want. Like maybe being low level, your challenges and the things that suck for you are way different than somebody that's building like a layer or two above that. This is open to interpretation. Like what would make your life better? Like what's not great about like building on Solana? It could be as much as just like building in such a greenfield space and like not have anything to compare it to, just as like a proposed thought. I know this is harder for a core engineer because you're building infrastructure like for how things work versus like building on top of the things that are building down low. So maybe you don't have something specific that sucks for you.
I mean, the thing the thing that comes top of mind, which is maybe something that people might not consider, which is this thing is like the network is live. We cannot break things. That is the toughest thing. That's like, it's not like before mainnet was launched, where if you want to make a consensus breaking change, it's like, yeah, no problem. You just make like a 10-line code change, you're good. Now, if we want to make that 10-line code change, we need to wait 6 months for it to actually hit mainnet, if not longer. Or we need to support like all sorts of old use cases because the network's running. We can't just like rug anything that's going on. As I'm sure you were aware with the upgrade to 1.16, we made a breakage somewhere, and oh boy, did we hear about it. And like, trust me, I felt that pain too. I had to spend a week in order to do it for SPL, and that's already knowing all of the code and knowing like ahead of time what the changes were going to be. I can't imagine like for others how much more difficult it was for them.
Yeah. Well, that's a good answer. Like, I guess, like, now that I'm thinking about it, speaking to a core engineer, that I can probably rephrase. Like, the next question is typically like, what's great about building on Solana, which is typically means building on top of the stuff that you do. So let me rephrase this. Like, what excites you about building what you're building right now, like for Solana? Like, what's like you're still here, man. Like, you're still here. So there's a reason for that. I mean,
this will probably go back. I didn't get the chance to say this, but like one of the reasons that I was really into joining Solana all the way at the beginning was I looked at this thing and I noticed that it just freaking worked. Like, that was the coolest thing. There are so many, I'm not going to throw shade on any specific blockchains or anything like that, but there's just like something that just works is really incredible. And also seeing sort of how hyped people can get about it, like hearing from my brother's friend who like didn't even know I was working at Solana, hearing him talk about it and him being like, oh man, yeah, I follow Anatoly on Twitter. He's so cool. Just like seeing how much excitement there is, it makes things really exciting. And like, there is still such a big open space. Like Runtime V2, we have a vague idea of what that's going to look like, but I don't know what programs are going to look like for it yet. I don't know how they're going to get linked against the runtime, things like that. So they've got plans for it, but eventually when you want to make an actual composable blockchain, there's like so many other things that need to be done. So yeah, we don't know where it's going to go. So that's probably the most exciting part.
No, that's a cool answer. And also, like, we're pretty honest, and I'm pretty honest on this show. And when you say it just works, there were some times where it just didn't work, and those were not very fun times. But like, this is why I like to talk about it, though. It's because, and I had Brian Long on here recently, and we were discussing some of this stuff, and it's like the amount of like just up like that. I think it was early 2022, the first sort of like little hiccup that uncovered like so much that took 6 months of research just to understand what it was, and then probably another 6 months to decide how it was going to be implemented. And then like all of those things like Quick and global fee markets and all those things, like that work took a long time, but it got done. And like, holy shit, that was like a stressful year and time. But like to core engineers' credit, to the validators' credit, to all the ecosystem engineers that actually, I know that there was a handful of them, and I don't want to call anybody out specifically, came in and also offered support to help figure that stuff out, write some code, solve some problems. But that's what happens when you're building something that nobody's ever built before. Well, build it before this fast, and like at this level of decentralization. So that's the stuff that's really cool to me. But in those moments, they are not fun.
I mean, the network goes down. It happens.
So final question for you. And like, again, you're a core engineer, so it's going to be a little bit different of an answer maybe than some people. But like, what advice would you give to anybody that's looking to come and build either at your level or just like on Solana? Like, what sort of advice would you give those people? Because it's not like something that's going to necessarily come easy. We're in a whole new world here. Like, it's barely cared about by the majority of the world. Like, what advice would you give somebody who wants to get in to building the types of systems that you're building right now?
Honestly, the number one thing, and this is what I always tell people, is just read the source. Like, just read the code. That is like by far the best thing. That is how you'll be able to do the best contributions. That is how you'll understand what's really going on. Half the time we'll be like, oh, how does this work? I'm like, I don't know. Just got to read the source. It's extremely daunting when you're first starting because you're like, where do I start? That's where typically like reaching out to someone over maybe the Solana Tech Discord in order to ask like where things are in the validator. Like that's not that. I know we don't have like a perfect space in order to ask these questions just yet. The Stack Exchange is a good place if you're wondering like, where do gossip packets get routed? It's like, okay, well, I can point you to that file. Or, where do transactions get replayed? Well, it's in replay stage, but like if you don't know that, you don't know that. So I would say read the source, submit PRs. That's like the best way to get engaged.
And if you are engaged on Stack Exchange, Jon has probably answered at least one of your questions. I'm pretty sure you're like, where are you right now on the leaderboard for Solana? Have you gotten leapfrogged yet by a bunch of people? No.
I do check it every once in a while. Hold on, let me check over.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's
do it live. Let's see where you land on the solana.stackexchange.com leaderboard in terms of contributions.
I'm at 7,500 points, and Jon is behind me at 5,100, and Trent at 4,200. Oh, sorry, I meant Jon from the other Jon from DevRel. Was he on DevRel?
Oh, yeah, okay, awesome. And then Trent, top 3. Anybody watching this, you need to step up your game.
I'm always surprised that Trent is that high because he has way fewer answers than I do.
Maybe he just has better quality than you, man.
Yeah, that is what it is. I didn't want to say it, but...
All right, man. Well, that's the end of the show. Thank you for finding the time to come on here. I'm sure I'll get yelled at by the rest of your team for stealing you away from your actual job and coming here. But it's not always easy to get a core engineer to agree to come and put their face on the internet. So I really appreciate it, man.
I mean, you could probably get Trent to do it, but he wouldn't show his face.
Yeah, exactly. I actually think I sent him a message and said, I know you probably say no, but will you do this? And he just never replied to me. So I took that as a no.
Maybe Carl would do it if he wouldn't show his face.
All right, man. Well, again, thanks for showing up. Thanks for being here. Thanks for everything you do, man.
Thanks for having me, Chase.
Cheers.
Bye.